Yeah, hi, all. Good evening, everyone. In today's session, we are going to discuss about servlet config, servlet context, and session. What is a servlet config? A servlet config is an interface. Servlet config is an interface. When the servlet object is created, then the servlet config object also will create. Along with servlet, the servlet config object will also create. So the servlet config object can use anywhere in the respective servlet. Servlet config is regarding to a specific servlet. So whenever that initialize, whenever the servlet is initialized, along with servlet, the servlet config object also will create. Why that servlet config? The usage of the servlet config is we can send the pass, we can send the information throughout the servlet at the time of initialization. So we'll see how we will use this servlet and what is the usage of this servlet, this servlet config. Generally, when the servlet object will create and when the values will to it is, let me check it here. See, here we have a login page. When we send the values from here, the username and password, these values can get in servlet. The servlet is validate servlet using these parameters. Get parameter and request dot get password. So when we can get these values, when you give the values here, we as a request. In case if you do not give the values here, then there will be no values. These values will be null. Sometimes we have a requirement that whenever the deployment descriptor, whenever the deployment descriptor is starting at the time of servlet initiating, at the time of servlet initiating, at the time of servlet initiating itself, if you required any value, then that value will configure in deployment descriptor itself, in web.xml itself. For example, now at the time of servlet initialization itself, I want to pass my email ID. I want to pass my email ID. If I want to pass my email ID, what I have to do, first I need to configure it in web.xml. That is, here I have a servlet. Servlet name validate, servlet class is validate. So that is within the servlet tag. Here I mentioned the configuration that is init param by init param. So within this init param, so at the time of initializing the servlet, we are passing some values. That is email. That is email. Param name is email. Parameter name is email. Parameter value is c.srinivaslu77@gmail.com. So I want to pass my email ID at initialization time. At the time of initializing the servlet, just this. So as I told you previously, first from where it will start the execution, the project execution, it will start from web.xml, from deployment descriptor. So this is the deployment descriptor. So when the servlet is loaded, then at the time of loading the servlet, at the time of initializing the servlet itself, so these values will pass. So now the scope of this init param is this servlet. So wherever we have this servlet, so in the servlet anywhere we can get these values as servlet config object. This is the servlet config object. So what it do? Servlet config interface. When the web container initializes a servlet, it creates a servlet config object. Yes, it is initializing, then it will create a servlet config object. This is the servlet config object. So, and then the servlet config objects used to pass information to a servlet during initialization by getting the configuration information from the web.xml, from the deployment descriptor. So we can pass the values for this specific servlet. So how we can get these values in the servlet? We have to create servlet config object, and then we need to get these values. So how we can get these values, I will show you. So first, whenever we click on login, the validate servlet will execute. In validate servlet, so what will happen? The name, whatever the name will give, whatever the password will give, this password will take. If the name is Srini and password is Virat, then it will forward the request and response to the another servlet, that is welcome servlet. Welcome is the another servlet, this servlet. So in this servlet, we are printing the some message. If not, if name is not equal to Srini or password is not equal to Virat, and I also it will print this line, that is you have entered incorrect username or password, and then we are creating the request to dispatcher, so that we want to include this index.html page. And then here I am using the servlet config object. So how will create the servlet config object is servlet config sc equal get servlet config. So here we have created the servlet config object. Using this servlet config object, we can get the init parameter, whatever we are passing in this web.xml. In the web.xml, we are passing the init parameter value, that is c.srinivaslu77@gmail.com. So this value I can get here using servlet config object. So that is out.println servlet config object get init parameter. The parameter name is email. The parameter name is email. So here what is the parameter name? Parameter name is email. Parameter value is c.srinivaslu77@gmail.com. Then this one will print. This email will print. Okay. Now let us check here. First, refreshing. Yes. Here I am giving value something, and here also I am giving. And then when click on login, now see, you have entered incorrect username or password, and then c dot srinivaslu77@gmail.com. It is printed on browser. This is printed on browser. The same servlet config I am using in another, that is in welcome servlet. In welcome servlet also I am using same object, that is servlet config, the servlet config, and then here also I am trying to print, but this servlet config, this init param regarding to a particular servlet, which is servlet, that is validate servlet. But now username and password is correct, Srini and Virat, then it will call this servlet welcome servlet. But this is regarding to this servlet. See, within this servlet, so it is closed. So this init param is regarding to a particular. So it is for passing the information for the servlet at the time of initialization. For which servlet? Validate servlet. But this is another servlet, welcome servlet. For welcome servlet, we did not mention this init param. So we cannot get this email ID because this email ID regarding to validate servlet, not regarding to the welcome servlet. So here we cannot get. In welcome servlet, even though you created the object, so the email value you cannot create, we cannot get this email value because this is not regarding to welcome servlet. So this config is regarding to the validate servlet. So in validate, in welcome servlet also, if you mention the init param, these values, then we can get it. If we mention these in validate servlet also, in welcome servlet also, we can get it. But as of now, these are regarding to only validate servlet. So if you give the correct values, even though it's a correct, see, welcome to the web developer, Mr. Srini. So this is the value. Welcome to the web app developer, web app development, Mr. Srini, and then this configuration is null. This is the null. Because why this is null? Because we did not servlet config. We did not give the value in web.xml in deployment descriptor. In deployment descriptor. So the servlet config, if you want to pass the information at the time of initialization through deployment descriptor, then we will use the servlet config. Then we have a requirement. We have to pass the information from deployment descriptor, but that has to work for all the servlets, not a single servlet. That has to work for all the servlets. Then if you want to pass the values for all the servlets throughout the application, then we have another option, that is servlet context. Servlet config is regarding to particular servlet. Servlet context is regarding to all the servlets that will work for all the servlets. So how will you configure that servlet context is? So, so the servlet context for is used for defining the configuration details. If you want to pass the configuration details, then all the configuration details we can put inside the context parameter, servlet context. So how we define in the web.xml in deployment descriptor, here it will be like this: context param by context, and within the context param we will have a param name and then param value. Param name is driver name and param value is orkil.jdbc.driver.orkil driver. This is the orkil driver name. So now this driver we can driver name in validate servlet and also in welcome servlet. In both places we can get this driver name. But servlet config is regarding to a particular servlet. So the init param values have to define in all servlets. But we can mention the configuration details in servlet context param. If you mention the in servlet context param, the servlet context param values we can servlets. If there are 10 servlets, we can use in 10 servlet classes. So the servlet context interface. For every web application, a servlet context object is created by the web container. Web container is the web.xml. Then servlet context object is used to get the configuration information from deployment descriptor. If you want information from deployment descriptor, what is the configuration? JDBC configuration. We are doing the JDBC configurations. If you want to get those configuration details from the deployment descriptor, then we will use the servlet context interface. So how we get those values? How will we get these values? First, let us check it in servlet validate uh, servlet. In the validate servlet, so now I will get I will create the context servlet context object is get servlet context is the method. So it will return servlet context. It returns the context. Return the servlet context. Now, if you want to print this object, then we require the object that is out print writer object out dot println dot println. Here we can get sc dot get init parameter. Get init parameter of What's the value? How to pass driver name. Driver name. Now let us check whether this driver name will get it. I am restarting the server. So stop. So if you change the code, then you need to start the server again. Click start. Server is started. Now screen is opened. Now see. So oracle.jdbc.driver.oracle driver. So in case if you give correct username and password as Srini and Virat, then there's a null value. We did not configure it. So here we configure this in welcome servlet also. In welcome servlet also. Here I am configuring that context, servlet context. So here change code, we need to stop the server and then we need to restart the server again. Okay, now we are using the servlet context from welcome servlet, from validate servlet. We can use anywhere because it is not a servlet config, it is a servlet context. Servlet context we can use for any servlets. Servlet context object we can use anywhere. So now we can get the value from validate servlet as well as from welcome servlet. So when you give wrong, then it displayed you have entered incorrect username or password, then it has given. If you give correct, then login. Yes, welcome to web app development, Mr. Srini, oracle.jdbc.driver.oracle driver. It has displayed. This is from welcome servlet, previously from validate servlet. So servlet context object can use everywhere. That's the difference between servlet config and servlet context. Servlet config object is regarding to a specific servlet, but servlet context is for all the servlets. The servlet config will create the servlet config for passing the information from deployment descriptor for the servlet. If you want to pass the configuration details from deployment descriptor, then we will use the servlet context object, because servlet context we can use everywhere for all the servlets. And the next one is session. And next one is the session. What is the session in servlets? The session is for storing the information of a particular user. For example, the request is nothing but, as of now, request. When I request as a login app, it has displayed this message. And then when I give the values And then when I click on login, this is another request. Yes. When I give this request, then welcome to the web app development, it has displayed. So one user, one user may request many things. His request has to, all his requests has to store somewhere. So we have to get the information that who has given this request. A one person may give multiple requests. For example, if you go if you go Flipkart, go for Flipkart. What you do first, you select three items. You have selected three items. So first for mobile, one request. First you will search for mobile, and then you will search for earphones, and then you will search for power bank. So all are by same user, one user. So there are three requests. One is for mobile, and one request is for earphone, another request is for power bank. Three requests. These all three requests are done by a single user. Then similarly, Flipkart is web application. Multiple users log in at a time. So I log in here, and then I will select these three items. You also log in from another system. He will select some other things, some toys, something he will select it. Some other person will log in and he will select something. Then it has to maintain who has given this request. I am giving the request to select for mobile. You are giving the request to select some toys. Someone is giving request to select electronic, some electronic item. So if my requested item is added to that, how it will be? So how many items I will request, those all items has to be with my name. So the data has to store the information. So it has to find out who has selected this item, who sent the request for this item. So my user ID will have uh, the information that it is selected this item by so and so user. This item is selected by so and so user. This item is selected by so and so user. So that will capture the user information. If it has to store the user information who has sent this request, then we require the session. Session is for storing the user information. For storing the user information. So how will you use that session? How will you use that session? We need to create the HTTP session object. HTTP session object. So here HTTP session object is used to store and user attribute from the HTTP session object. So any servlet can have a access to the HTTP session object throughout the session method. So this HTTP session object can get by any servlet. Once we log in, then our username will take it as a attribute, and this this can use for all the servlets. Used for all the servlets. So how will you create this session object? So we can create the session object by request. That is here request dot get session dot get session. So it will return the HTTP session. Return the HTTP session session. Now if you want to know which user has given this request, which user has given this request, we can know by this session object. So for this session we need to set the attribute. We need to set the attribute, the username, the login name we need to set. So for that we have the attribute, that is set attribute. That is set attribute. For setting the attribute, so here we can set the attribute. Here session dot attribute. So here can give as, and here it is name. User, the login user name, login user name. And then if you want to print that session, then here out dot println, out dot println. Here we can get the object, that is session dot get attribute, session dot get attribute of name, session dot get attribute of name. The name, it will print it here. Otherwise here directly we can put this in login name is it will print the login user name. Whoever login, whoever login, the login user name it will print it here. So it will store the login username details. The session object will store the login username details. Here now the login username is null because we did not give any value. If I give Srini, it has to display this value Srini. What's the problem? Need to restart. Whatever the login name we will give, the same login name has to display here. The login username is Srini. If someone is login, the login name has to display here. So Srini still none. It is wrong. Oh, not displaying. Have created the session object, and then we are setting the attribute, that is session dot set attribute. It is the user. So name, we have to give this name, user. It has to be in get it. Stock, and restarting the server again. Server is, yeah, server started. Now I will refresh the project again. Now the user is Srini. Yeah, the login username is Srini. If I give Ram, the your login username is Ram. If I give Rakesh, the login username is Rakesh. So the session will maintain the user details. The session maintains the user details. Who has given this request? That is maintained by the session. The session we can use everywhere. We can use everywhere. So now if I want to use the same in welcome servlet also, I can use it. So as of now, yeah, the welcome servlet, welcome to web app development, Mr. Srini, and then WordPress JDBC driver. If you want to capture the user information from welcome servlet, also can capture. So for that, the same I will create in the so here we need to create the session object. Get session. Get session. It will return the session object HTTP session. Session. Now the username getting so we need to stop the server and then need to restart the server again. It's started. I need to refresh the project. Srini, reload. Now, welcome to Web App Development, Mr. Srini, oracle.jdbc.driver.oracle driver. The login username is Rakesh. Login username is Rakesh. So the session is maintaining that Rakesh. Something is wrong. So clean up. Oh my God. That's wrong. Here, Srini. Ram. Yes. The login username is Ram. It is coming something we have made wrong. That is, yeah, the session, it is not going to the else part. Here I set the value has to set here, has to set it here, because when username is Srini and password is Virat, then this code will execute. It will not go to the else part. But here the session set attribute I put in the else part previously. So that is what it did not capture this value. So session.set attribute is user name is the login username. Whoever login the name, the login username, this is the value. Now it will create it. have changed the code, so I need to restart the server. I stopped the server and again started the server. To refresh. Srini and Virat. Yeah, now see. The login username is Srini. The login username is Srini. It has displayed. So if you want the well, here put it the break. To restart. Add Srini Virat. Yes. Welcome to the web of development, Mr. Srini. Oracle JDBC driver, Oracle driver. The login username is Srini. So once we set the attribute, once we set the attribute that we can get the same session from anywhere, from validate servlet or from a welcome servlet, from everywhere we can get the session details. So sometimes when we are doing some request, suppose we are adding some information. So we need who has added this information. In case if you delete, we need who has deleted this information. If someone updates, it has to update who has updated this information. So that we can maintain using this session. Using this session object, because when login, then it will have a login user ID, the login user ID username, then the login username we can use throughout all the servlets. If something is added, something is added, some object is added, then will have a database column that is created by, updated by, deleted by. Those are database columns. Created date, updated date, deleted date, and which date you have deleted also it will capture. So all the tables will have a audit information. That audit information, for the audit information will pass by this session. Now easily you can know who has login, who has login. So suppose if here something wrong, if the login ID is wrong, then here it will capture the login username is wrong. So this request is sent by the wrong. If you change Srini, then the login username is Srini. That the login details, the login information will stored by this session. servlet config object, servlet context object, and session object. So this is for today. In discuss other concepts. Until then, take care.